Mason Clarke was a name no one truly knew, yet everyone in Liverpool's underworld feared. To the outside world, he was just another ghost in the crowd, quiet, invisible, forgettable. But behind closed doors, Mason controlled an empire that stretched from the cold docks of Merseyside to the burning streets of Los Angeles. Every shipment, every deal, every death carried his unseen signature. And when his empire finally began to crumble, it wasn't the police or his rivals that destroyed him. It was the shadows he had created himself. Please subscribe for daily new update of gang crime story and watch till end. Liverpool, the city that breathes through rhythm and rivalry. The home of the Beatles, the heart of football, and a place where pride runs deep in every street. But beneath that charm lies another world that most people never see. A world built on fear, loyalty, and silent war. In the early 2000s, when jobs were disappearing and poverty grew in the estates, young men started finding their own way to earn. The promise of fast money and respect was stronger than any law. What began as petty theft and street fights slowly turned into organized crime. The older gangs that once ruled Liverpool's underworld had faded, leaving behind a vacuum that no one controlled. And where there's no ruler, chaos grows quickly. The new generation didn't want to be known as gangsters. They called themselves crews, groups of friends who would do anything for each other. They didn't wear colors or carry names that drew attention. They blended in, working normal jobs by day and moving drugs, stolen goods, or weapons by night. In the beginning, their world seemed small, limited to a few streets, a few deals, and a few risks. But the city as ports, the gateway to Europe and beyond, gave them a chance to dream bigger. Every ship that came into Liverpool's docks was an opportunity, and every container could hide something worth millions. Police officers started noticing patterns, unexplained money moving through bank accounts, expensive cars in poor neighborhoods, and people who seemed untouchable despite their records. But they couldn't connect the dots. The gangs didn't fight openly. There were no drive-by shootings or flashy murders. Everything happened quietly. Deaths settled in the dark, bodies disappearing without a sound. The silence was their greatest weapon. In this hidden world, a new name began to circulate among street dealers, the Dockside Crew. At first, no one knew who they were. Some said they were a myth. Others whispered that they ran everything coming through the port. What set them apart was discipline. They didn't show off, they didn't argue, and they didn't forgive. They used coded phones, encrypted messages, and a web of shell companies to move drugs across the UK. When police finally realized what was happening, it was already too late. The crew had built an empire from the shadows. By 2010, Liverpool's nightlife, transport, and even construction industries were quietly influenced by them. A bar fight could be a message. A stolen van could hide a shipment. They were everywhere and nowhere. The people of Liverpool knew something dark was growing beneath the city's bright lights, but no one spoke about it. Fear replaced curiosity. The older generation warned their sons to stay away from the docks, not the place itself, but the men who controlled it. For outsiders, Liverpool still looked the same, full of energy and hope. But for those who lived close to the streets, the air felt different. Something was changing. The invisible hands that ruled the underworld were growing stronger, smarter, and far more dangerous than anyone imagined. And among those unseen forces was a man whose name would soon echo far beyond the city limits, the man who built the Dockside Empire and turned Liverpool's shadows into a global network of crime. The Dockside Crew began with a simple plan: to control the flow of drugs entering Liverpool through the city as massive shipping ports. The docks had always been the heartbeat of Liverpool's economy, and for decades, smugglers had tried to use them for profit, but the Dockside Crew did it differently. They didn't rely on violence or chaos. They used precision, organization, and silence. At the center of their growing power was a man known only as Mason. No one outside his inner circle had ever seen his face clearly, and those who worked for him knew better than to ask questions. Mason's leadership style was cold and careful. He believed fear was effective, but invisibility was better. Every shipment, every deal, every connection went through a chain of people who never met each other directly. Mason built his empire through relationships, not wars. He paid dock workers to look the other way. He had friends in customs, in transport, and even among small business owners. The drugs came in hidden inside containers labeled as electronics, textiles, or seafood. By the time the authorities noticed, the goods were already scattered across the country. Money flowed back through fake companies, investment firms, and offshore accounts. Mason's rule was simple: stay low, stay quiet, and stay rich. For years, this strategy worked perfectly. Police were always one step behind, and rival gangs couldn't touch him. But success breeds attention, and attention breeds enemies. When a rival group from Manchester hijacked one of the Dockside Crew's major shipments in 2012, Mason's calm reputation cracked for the first time. The shipment had been worth over £2 million, and its loss threatened everything he had built. Within days, 3 members of the Manchester gang vanished without a trace. Their cars were found abandoned near the waterfront, doors open, engines cold. There were no bodies, no blood, and no witnesses. Only a message carved crudely into the wall of a nearby shipyard. "We run the port." The entire city got the message. No one stole from Mason and lived to tell about it. That single act of terror established the Dockside Crew as untouchable. Dealers, smugglers, and transporters all fell in line. The docks became sacred ground, a zone controlled not by police or politicians, but by Mason's quiet authority. Even the legitimate shipping industry began to feel his influence. Companies that refused to cooperate found their shipments delayed, their drivers threatened, or their warehouses mysteriously burned. Those who helped him prospered. Those who didn't disappeared. Behind all of this, Mason was planning something far bigger than anyone realized. He was no longer satisfied with being a local kingpin. He wanted to create an international pipeline, a system that could move drugs, money, and weapons between continents with corporate precision. He hired accountants, tech experts, and logistics specialists to design digital networks that could hide illegal trades within legitimate ones. It wasn't just street crime anymore. It was organized corruption. The Dockside Crew no longer looked like a gang. They looked like businessmen with expensive suits and quiet offices. But beneath that polished image was a machine built on fear and blood. Liverpool's docks had become more than a smuggling route. They were now the center of an empire, ruled by a man who believed he could control the world from the shadows. And as Mason expanded his reach, the line between business and crime began to disappear completely. By 2015, Mason's ambitions had outgrown Liverpool. The city that once felt like his entire kingdom now seemed too small for what he had built. The Dockside Crew had connections in every major UK port, and their network stretched from Scotland to London. But Mason was no longer satisfied with moving drugs across borders. He wanted to control the routes themselves. Through careful alliances and secret investments, he began building ties with suppliers in South America and distributors in Europe. His business model was simple but brilliant: cut out the middlemen and take control of both ends of the chain. It was a plan that could make him one of the most powerful underground figures in the world. Using encrypted communication and untraceable accounts, Mason's men began traveling across Europe, meeting cartel representatives under the disguise of legitimate trade deals. His London front company, Dockline Logistics, became the legal face of his empire. On paper, it transported goods between the UK, Spain, and the United States. In reality, it was a pipeline for illegal trade worth millions. The Dockside Crew had officially gone global. Mason's biggest breakthrough came when he made contact with a small but rising organization in Los Angeles that specialized in synthetic drug distribution. L.A. had always been known for its gangs, from the street-level groups of South Central to the organized syndicates of East L.A. But Mason wasn't interested in joining the chaos. He wanted partnership, not territory. He offered something the American gangs didn't have: international reach and access to European ports. In return, they gave him connections to the West Coast's booming synthetic market. The deal was risky, but it worked. Within a year, shipments were moving between Liverpool and Los Angeles under the cover of ordinary business cargo. The partnership changed everything. Money began to flow faster than ever, and Mason's network became more digital, more sophisticated, and harder to trace. He used cryptocurrency to clean profits, created offshore accounts under fake names, and even funded small startup companies to disguise his financial trails. From an office hidden inside an old warehouse near the docks, Mason controlled an empire that stretched across oceans. But success, once again, brought danger. The L.A. partners he trusted were not as disciplined as he was. They liked to show off cars, jewelry, weapons, and cash, drawing unwanted attention. In one viral social media post, a member of the American crew posed in front of a luxury car with a shipment code visible in the background. Investigators picked it up, and suddenly, agencies in both countries started asking questions. Mason was furious, but there was no undoing it. His perfectly invisible network had been exposed by carelessness. To make matters worse, one of the L.A. partners betrayed him, selling information about shipping routes to a rival cartel in Mexico. Shipments went missing, money vanished, and a hit was ordered on Mason's closest associate in London. For the first time in years, Mason's control began to crack. The empire he had built through silence and precision was now bleeding from within. He had enemies on both sides of the ocean, and the trust that once held everything together was dissolving. But Mason wasn't ready to fall. Instead, he went deeper underground, cutting ties, erasing trails, and preparing for a counterattack that would shock everyone who thought he was finished. In his mind, this wasn't an ending. It was just another evolution of power. What no one knew was that Mason had already begun building something new, something even darker, that would soon drag both Liverpool and Los Angeles into a storm neither city was ready for. The beginning of Mason's downfall came quietly, not through violence or betrayal, but through a small mistake made by someone he had never even met. A warehouse manager working for one of the Dockside Crew. Shell companies noticed strange patterns in the delivery logs. Shipments listed, but never arriving. Trucks that didn't match the routes they were supposed to take. Suspicious, he filed a report to his supervisor, unaware that it would reach the National Crime Agency within days. That single act of diligence opened the first real crack in Mason's empire. Investigators launched a secret operation, tracing encrypted communication between Liverpool and Los Angeles. They didn't yet know who Mason was, but they knew someone was controlling both ends of a massive transatlantic drug network. In 2018, everything began to unravel. During a raid on a seemingly abandoned storage site near the docks, authorities found an encrypted laptop hidden behind a false wall. Inside it were records of offshore accounts, international transfers, coded messages, and detailed notes about every deal the Dockside Crew had made in the past 5 years. It was the kind of evidence that criminal investigators only dream of finding, the complete blueprint of a hidden empire. Within weeks, simultaneous raids were launched in Liverpool, London, and Los Angeles. Dozens of arrests were made, warehouses were sealed, and millions in cash and assets were seized. But Mason was gone. Hours before the first raid, he disappeared. Some said he had been tipped off by someone inside law enforcement, while others believed he had anticipated the collapse long before it happened. His house was empty, his phones were destroyed, and his digital footprints erased. Not a single photograph, voice recording, or bank login was left behind. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The men who were caught refused to talk. Some claimed they didn't even know Mason personally. They had worked for a faceless boss who gave orders through encrypted phones and anonymous messages. Police struggled to prove direct connections. The Dockside Crew was built on layers of distance. Each man only knew the one above him, never the one in charge. Despite the massive arrests, Mason remained a ghost. Without his leadership, the organization began to fracture. The remaining members fought over money and territory, turning on one another in desperate attempts to survive. Shootings broke out across Merseyside. Cars were torched, safe houses raided, and old loyalties shattered overnight. What had once been a silent empire of order and discipline became a battlefield of greed and fear. Within months, the once unbreakable Dockside Crew was reduced to fragments. When investigators examined Mason's records, they uncovered something that stunned them: a business plan. He had been preparing to transform his criminal network into a legitimate global logistics company. The plan included legal partnerships, trade routes, and investors who had no idea where their money truly came from. His ultimate goal wasn't to remain a gangster, but to reinvent himself as a respected businessman. It was a dream built on corruption and ambition, and it ended before it could begin. Even after his empire's collapse, Mason's legend grew. Some believed he had escaped to Dubai, living under a new identity. Others claimed he was killed by his own men and buried beneath the docks he once ruled, but no proof ever surfaced. The empire he built from shadows had dissolved, yet his presence lingered, a ghost story whispered among criminals and police alike. Mason had shown the world how a single man could control cities, ports, and even countries without ever being seen, and how easily it could all disappear in a single night. Liverpool has changed, yet the ghosts of its past still walk the docks at night. The warehouses stand quieter now, the ships move under tighter watch, but the silence carries a memory that refuses to fade. The collapse of the Dockside Crew left a vacuum that was quickly filled by smaller, more reckless gangs. They lacked Mason's discipline and vision, but they were hungry for the same kind of power. They fought not for control of trade routes or international deals, but for street corners, for reputation, for scraps of what once was a global empire. The police called it progress, saying the big network had been dismantled. But the truth was more complicated. The structure Mason built didn't just disappear. It had spread, hidden in business systems, buried in bank accounts, disguised in companies that still operated legally today. Investigators working years after his disappearance began to notice patterns. Certain shipping firms, investment startups, and trading companies had links that led back to names associated with the Dockside Crew. The money still moved, just more carefully. Some officers believed Mason was still alive, controlling everything from afar under a new name. Others argued that his methods had simply outlived him, copied and reused by the next generation. Either way, the ghost of the Dockside Crew was still working, silently keeping Liverpool's underworld alive. For the people of the city, life went on. The docks, once the center of both industry and crime, became symbols of renewal. New businesses arrived, tourists returned, and headlines celebrated regeneration. Yet every few months, something would remind everyone that the old shadows hadn't gone. A missing container, a van found abandoned near the river, a businessman under investigation for fraud, small echoes of a story the city could never completely escape. The fear was quieter, but it was still there, woven into the rhythm of the streets. Across the ocean, in Los Angeles, the investigation continued. Detectives tracing financial networks kept finding transactions that connected back to old accounts opened by Dockline Logistics. Offshore companies in the Caribbean and Cyprus still funneled money through routes Mason had once designed. It was as if his system had become self-sustaining, surviving without its creator. Some of his former partners in L.A. had either been arrested or killed, Yet the digital fingerprints of the empire remained. Even in failure, Mason as blueprint had become a guide for modern criminals who saw crime as business and fear as management. The story of Mason and the Dockside Crew has become a lesson for law enforcement, a warning that the future of crime will not be fought in alleys or with guns, but in servers, data centers, and corporate boardrooms. The new generation of gangs no longer needs to control the streets. They control systems. The underworld now wears suits, signs contracts, and speaks the language of business. Mason may be gone, but his vision became reality. The boundaries between crime and capitalism have blurred so deeply that they now coexist. Liverpool still shines under city lights, proud of its music, its people, and its resilience. But beneath the surface lies a quiet truth, that the docks which once brought life to the city also birthed a darkness that learned how to survive in daylight. The legend of Mason isn't just a crime story. It's a reflection of the modern world, where power hides not in weapons, but in silence. From Liverpool to Los Angeles, the empire may have fallen, but the shadows it left behind still whisper through the waves, reminding everyone that the underworld never truly disappears. It simply changes its shape.